Hey folks, welcome back. Professor Krishna here. Hope you're enjoying your spring break. Guess what I'm doing? Grading Project 3. So this is video feedback for Project 3, the Digital Coloring Fundamentals, Spring 2024. I'm going to look at your the way that you're utilizing color to accentuate a focal point, the way you're using color to evoke material, and then also looking at color contrast. I'll briefly touch upon your process work. I'm primarily looking to see that you've got process data is neatly labeled and organized. So here goes. And if I lose my voice, I apologize. I spent the earlier parts of the morning recording the video feedback for the other class. So uh, let's take a look and see what you got. All right, so first up on deck is Ethan. Let me go ahead and do a Command Y. All right, so we've got a focal point, a light color here for the character's face. Really pulls you in. We've got, I think, largely color flats. I'm seeing some shading here, which is good. Seeing some shading here, which is also good. We see a little evidence of some material and texture by way of adding some lines to indicate shine, which is helpful as well. Um, I think this could benefit more from adding some more shading, like uh, on some of the characters that might be in the background here. You've got an opportunity to differentiate the faces of the vehicle here. The front could be in a slightly different color. But overall, I'm seeing that the objects are standing apart from the other objects, which is really good. There's still some areas here, like this little rectangle, where it's blending in with its background. But overall, Ethan, things are, you've got good contrast, which is good. This little area on the motorbike here, I think you could maybe, lighten that up a little bit just so that it's not blending. Same thing with the motorbike and this guy's shirt. They're also blending a little bit, but overall, everything tends to pop. The big critique I'm going to give you is you need to go back in and you need to add some highlights. Very easy to do. Just go ahead and throw in some highlights here. You might even have an accent color, or let's just go ahead and say there's some light coming over here. And what that does is it just really puts emphasis on our focal point, right? He becomes a little bit more apparent because we have some light values in here. That's the one thing I will say. It's like you have some light values in terms of the teeth and what have you, but um, I think that you could add some other light values into this composition. There's a lot of, if I look at the histogram here, we can see that there is a lot of medium gray values here, but very little in the way of light gray values. So that tells me that you're not including your highlights in there. So double check that, make sure that that's good. All right, process stages. Let me just see. There's someone else's work peeking underneath that. Let me just hide that. Process stages look pretty good. They're labeled nice and neat. Color flat, shadows and highlights, and final. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Um, so I don't really have any issues with that per se. I'm just doing a selection here. Yeah, I think one thing I would say, now that I'm thinking about it, I thought I saw this earlier. Um, I would just include, instead of putting the images right up close to the edge of that canvas, just bring them in a little bit, Ethan, just scale them down. And I think that will definitely help you out. The other thing I want to say too is you've got some texturing information in there, and think about the other textures that are in this composition too. And I think adding that and adding some highlights will really start to make things pop. Okay, moving on to Mr. Tyler. So let's see, we've got the lightest element here in the middle. I think you could maybe push that a little bit more, Tyler, just because there are no real light values outside of the eyes. And these two values are very similar to one another. And there's a lot of areas here where your color choices are kind of blending in, like the smoke, for example, is pretty much blending in with the background there. Um, I think your idea with the rim lighting here is pretty good. Um, and I like that you're adding some highlights onto this musculature here. This character right here, even the highlights or accents that you've added are just not showing up. They're not showing up very clearly anyway. So adding something else, you know, even, just doing something with her hair, perhaps. I don't know. Just there could be a lot of opportunities there to where you can start to make her pop a little bit from that background. I like the glow that you have here, I like the glow, and I like how the lighting is being affected by the cow skull in the center. So that part's good. I think there's also an opportunity here to bring about some texture to show reflectivity, right? Those are all other types of materials here, but you do have highlights, you do have shading. I do like the accents. I think that's also pretty strong. You just have to continue to adjust your, when you go into grayscale, just check your values and make sure that there's sufficient contrast, because you can see the Coke can, its contents are blending in with that background. All right, let's take a look at your process stages. Okay, process stages are nice and neat, properly labeled. Good work on that. Okay, Mika. All right, let's take a look and see what you got. All right, glowing eyes. That's really good because that gets the viewer right to those eyes. When we have a composition where we have eyes looking at us, that's our tendency to look at that in the composition. Um, I like the shading that you have on the cow skull. I like the reflectivity that you got on the windows there. I think it looks pretty good. So you do have some textural information there. Um, there is better contrast here than what we had before. So I think that's working better. You went back and you made some fixes here. Strong focal point. Uh, the character here pops against its background. This character stands apart from the girl behind him. I like the way that you're conveying the roundness of that mayo jar. That looks pretty cool. I would just say maybe adding other highlights. It just seems like there's a lot of dark values in the composition, so adding some type of other highlight information I think would be good. I like that some of that reflectivity is coming off on the alligator's nose, but either and what's like that you've got a nice accent color here, and I think that's working pretty well. But I think you could also maybe um, go back in with something that's really light, just so that some of those elements pop a little bit more from their background. Um, but overall, you did a good job of like being able to check your grayscale values and make sure that there's sufficient contrast. So I'm pretty pleased to see that. Okay, let's take a look at process stages. Look nice and neat. Awesome. Good work on that. Always like to see that. Really, really helpful. Okay, cool. Anna. Okay, so Anna, you missed out on our, we had a class session where we critiqued some older student work. I'm sure your classmates might have filled you in on that. Let's look at your stuff in grayscale. So our alligator, by way of the lines that you've drawn and the sweeping moves of this alien guy coming in towards the scene, our eye is heavily moving towards the right-hand side of the composition. What I'd like for you to do is to think about how you can invoke some of those light values onto the other side, just to balance out the composition. There's a lot of light areas concentrated here, and this is where my eye goes. This alligator, you're making him the focal point, but structurally, from a compositional standpoint, the cow skull in the center should be the focal point because everything is kind of leading us to the cow skull as the focal point. Um, you do have a good value range. Here, I think you could maybe expand upon that a little bit more, adding some accent lighting or other elements to some of your forms, I think could help. Think about how you can also convey material and reflectivity through your highlights. I think that would also be good too. Um, you're adding extra lines that I think probably, well, they weren't in the original composition. So I would try to honor what's there and instead of trying to add something else on top of it, because what that does is it just tends to it changes the meaning of the composition. And when you're a colorist, Your job is to just take whatever's been inked, and your job is to make that look good without changing its meaning. Okay. Um, some areas here you've got, when I look at this in grayscale, some of the values in the tires are kind of blending in with the asphalt on the ground. I think there could be some good opportunities here to, add some light values just to pull the viewer in a little bit more. You have a lot of dark values and a lot of medium values. If we look at the levels on this, we can see that there's a dominant amount of medium gray values within this composition. There's also this, this histogram that I'm showing you here basically says, okay, going from white to black, how many or how prominent are the values in this composition? So this is telling me there's very little white in the composition and a lot of dark black. And then the other elements in between basically suggest that there's a lot of medium gray values that are dominant within this composition. So you probably want to add some highlights just to balance those things out. And again, you want to kind of not change the meaning. You want to kind of still honor what's there. Um, and then think about how you can use your lighting as a way of communicating, or I mean, your coloring as a way of communicating lighting and material. All right, let me just look at your process stages here. So process stages are nice and neat and labeled. Just include your name on there somewhere. Just I like to have all of those things. You could probably scoot the whole thing up and then just put your name at the bottom. Also check the file naming conventions. I think you have, this just brings everyone's JPEG files in. So I noticed that there's some slight discrepancies there between what I'm asking for and what you call the file. So just check on that. All right, Mary Ann. Another swig of coffee here for me. I like the atmospheric lighting that you have. The glows are particularly convincing. Let's look at this in grayscale. So the glows are working really nicely, and I like that you have thought of some reflectivity, and you're doing a good job with your atmospherics. That part I think is working really, really well. I think some of the other elements here could probably benefit from some lighting information just because they are really hard to see and could potentially get lost in the mix, like the windows. Even like if you're trying to show a form here, just including some rim lighting or something that would just give us a better idea of this form, I think would help. And you can certainly do that. And then watch out, some of your color values here are blending in with the values that are behind it. So you do a good job with the cow skull, really has good contrast against its background, as does the computer against the alligator. I think that's working pretty well. This dude right here, we're losing the entire left side of his face. And that's okay if you want to add some element of mystery, but I think some hint of, rim lighting or something there will make it a little bit more obvious what is being communicated in that area. But I do like that you have juxtaposed warm against cool colors, and I like that the colors are reinforcing the focal point as being in the center, which is good to see. I think now, if I took off my changes here, you can see that some of the elements here are getting a little bit lost in the mix. But I do like the way that you've denoted highlights, and I like how you're not just using a saturated green, but you're using kind of a more muted green for the shadowed areas there too. And I think that this part over here looks pretty effective. Okay, let's see your process stages. A little bit of advice I would just say is you can shrink the images down a smidge, put the text labels underneath the image, and then also give yourself enough room. You could maybe just, keep this area blank to where you can put your actual name on there without the name covering up the art. Just, I think you're on the right track with that. Just, I think that it looks best when the name and other information are not on top of the artwork. Just try to find a way to make that work. Your process stages are showing and they are organized. I think that's that one thing I would say to just make it even better. Okay, all right. We're looking at Caden. So do my grayscale check. You guys knew I was going to do this. This is the first thing I'm going to do with everyone's work. I'm going to do a grayscale check. And the grayscale check seems to pass with our focal point, strong focal point established by way of a light value. We have some glowing stuff here. I think we can maybe push the contrast, Hayden, on the parts that of this character, even if there are two similar values here, using a rim light or some kind of an accent can just break that up a little bit. It basically draws a little bit more interest. Um, like seeing the highlights and shading. Good work. Your line control seems to be really good. I can see that curve right there. That's a really nice curve. I like the glow of the monitor. Um, I would just maybe think about pushing the contrast. Some of this area right here is getting a little bit lost in the mix. It's blending a little bit. Again, you don't have to necessarily change the color, but you can just add some kind of a rim lighting, and that's enough to go ahead and make that stand out. But overall, I think this one's looking pretty good. I like that the soda, you can see the soda, you can see the shine. Um, and then when I look at it in color, we can see that we've got a glowing ember here. That's also visible in the grayscale, so that's pretty cool that I just noticed that just now. Um, yeah, it's got good contrast overall. You know, the colors are what they are, but you know what? They still work for the most part. So I'm glad that you're thinking about contrast as you're doing this. Okay. All right. So let's see your process stages. Yep, process stages look pretty good. Just scoot these things down, give them a little bit of negative space above the illustration process stages. They'll just give it a nice, neat look. Okay. Julia. Okay, so control Wyatt. Okay, focal points really strong. I think my first comment here is that there needs to be more of a value range. It looks like you've got something super light in the middle and you've got a lot of dark values surrounding it. So if I do my control L, we can certainly see the histogram tells us the same thing. We have some light values. We don't have any white. The white area, the bar is flatlined. We do have light gray, and we have a lot of dark values here. There's a heavy concentration of dark values throughout this composition. So you need to go back in and add some light values in to balance that. Particularly in this area here, like this entire guy's face is getting lost completely. Um, I think your accent lights look pretty good. I would also maybe suggest making your shading a little bit more prominent. So you've got, like on this alligator here, I would just make some of these areas under his folds or whatever a little bit darker to further distinguish that. Um, and if you really want the eyes to be the focus here, if this is where we're being drawn to, and it's kind of like that too, but I mean, just adding some kind of a shine pulls the viewer. It also adds a little bit of white. For the material on his ruby, adding some shine there. This guy is kind of blending in with his background. It's a little bit too dark. I like the way that you've conveyed the smoke. I think that looks good. I like the way that you're conveying the window material. I think that looks good too. You can see how the blue in his eyes is just basically blending it over here. So just watch out for that. All right, so continue to communicate texture. And then also think about how you can use other types of lighting, like rim lighting or just highlights to help separate characters that might be against a background that is of a similar value. Okay, process stages are neatly labeled and organized. I don't really have much to say about that. I think that looks pretty good. Jax. Okay, so Jax has got his. Now, Jax sent me emails and we went back and forth a couple times to get feedback. And I think overall, it was pretty helpful. We've got a light focal point here. We have some highlights. We have some shading. It's very easy for me to see the characters against their background, which is really good. I like the kind of subtle shading that you have on the skull to convey its roundness, Jax. I think that looks pretty good. You've got some highlights on the windows. I even like what you did on the tires. That's pretty cool. So I think overall this one has sufficient contrast. Everything is easy to read. There is probably a really good value range on here too. So we can see Yeah, there's some areas that are super bright, but overall we have a mix of light, medium, and dark values here. This black here is just simply the inks that are represented, so you can see that there's a much more of a density of items there. Also like the subtle gradient here too, so it's not like it's just one flat color. You've given some thought about that. So overall, I think this one looks pretty solid. Let me just do another grayscale check here. Yeah, everything kind of just pops. We get a sense of the material. I think maybe just for these eyes, my one little nitpick would just be, adding some specularity or some shine on the light just pulls the viewer into that space just even more. But overall, pretty solid. Let's take a look at your process stages. Okay, inks, color flat, shading, atmospherics, final. Very well labeled. Good job. Okay, Zell. And just as a FYI to all of you, I want you guys to go ahead and put your names somewhere here, just so that I can see it. Um, so Zell, okay, so we've got grayscale test. Okay. I like the way that you're thinking about creating depth with your shading and highlights. That is pretty good to see. Like things feel dimensional. The hair on this young lady feels dimensional. Um, I like the contrast that you have between like the way that you're denoting highlights on his jacket. That looks good too. Things have a little bit of a pop. It has like a pop art feel, which I'm okay with. That looks pretty cool. And then you've got these the cigarettes look like they're rounded. I like the glow that you have on the eyes. So what you've done here is actually pretty good. I think that this could benefit from, bringing some of that green. Like I'll just sample the green that you have here. I think some of the cloth is getting a little bit lost in this whole thing. So adding some of that green accent, I think would just make it pop a little bit more and also give these figures some type of form. Um, you can see that despite whatever colors everybody has chosen here, it's like when you have sufficient contrast, things start to work. The one thing I will say is though, these eyes are the lightest elements in the composition. So if you want to really pull focus to our main guy here, adding some type of highlights, make it a little bit more obvious. I think that will go a long way towards even like having some type of a shine here. Will pull more focus towards our guy in the center. I like how the motorbike stands out against the background. Some of his jacket stuff is kind of getting a little bit lost, so this is one area where I would maybe recommend coming back in with some of the lighter values here, just again to help define the form. Uh, yeah, but outside of that, I think it looks pretty solid here. I'm so glad we did the kind of like that rubric evaluation because I'm really seeing a lot of benefit in your work when I'm looking at everyone's work so far. I'm seeing that you guys are taking to heart some of the things that we looked at a few weeks ago. All right, so we got inks, color flats, highlight shading. Remember to include your name on this as well, Zell. Just like have your name somewhere on there. I know that you got it labeled here, but make sure that you include that as well. Abigail, let me just do a command. Well, if I was going to do a command Y, but I did command L. We're seeing that there's a lot of, medium or like dark grays that are kind of missing on this one. But let's just see what that looks like when we do a command Y. So we have a focal point that's very clear. We have some highlights and we've got some reflectivity on the windshield. I think that's working pretty well. There is suitable contrast between the foreground motorcycle and the van compared to the background elements. You do have highlights. I think what would also make this even stand out a little bit more is just adding a little bit of a lighter value, not to necessarily compete with what you have going on here, but let me just demonstrate here. Just having a few areas where you have some light values you know, if the light's coming from behind, say, for example, I think that would, um, you know, continue to make this pop a little bit more. See, this is now we're introducing some light values that are um, just helping break up a lot of that, the medium color values that you have going on here. Same thing for these hooded figures here, just adding some hint of like a rim light or something like that would be good. I like that you got the cigarette smoke kind of permeating outside there. And you know what? The monochromatic color palette works. I have no problem with that. I just think that maybe going back in and adding some highlights in there would be good. And then, um, yeah, I think overall it's like it looks pretty solid. I think if you want to again pull focus on this dude, just using some direct highlights, just adding some white back in there will steer the viewer's eyes specifically to this general location, even if you just add some white like that. And that will just also, because you have a lot of colors that are medium and dark, right? So adding some type of highlights, I think, would help pull focus. Let's look at your process stages. Okay, so my only feedback on the process stages is try not to put stuff so far into the corner. I would just say, like, if this is your composition here, this goes for everybody. I would just say, um, you know, something like that, where there's a little bit of negative space, but there's also room for you to go ahead and write you know, your labels, and then you can put your name down here. I think with this layout, there's just so much extra space in the middle, so you could definitely scale the images up a little bit. Okay, so but the process stages are themselves are nice and neat. All right, LAN. Okay, so Command Wyatt. Some of your glows are making some of the objects a little bit hard to see. Like we're not able to see this guy's pupils really clearly. I do like the glow on this guy's eyes, and I do like that you're kind of creating a little bit of mystery around that computer. I think that's working pretty well, and there is a decent tonal range here going on. We do have some highlights. Uh, I think this black vehicle here, you can give it a little bit more dimension by having one side a little bit lighter than the other sides, like maybe the front half of this vehicle gets a little bit more light. I don't know, because like we're losing all the details in the wheels. That's the reason why I'm saying that. The eyes are also getting a little bit blown out with the glow as well. I think that you can play with accents a little bit more, just like you have here, where you have this white accent. I think that's pretty cool. I like the glow on the windows. The shadow here is interesting. I'm not sure if it's, you know, kind of like from something that's covering it, but, you know, give you the benefit of the doubt. But the leg of the alligator is blending in with its background, and we are losing some of the details over here. Overall, the color supports your focal point, which is good. Now I want you to think about how can you tweak the values even more to where we're not losing detail with your colors. So I think that you're the last person on my video list here. If I missed anybody, I apologize. I'm just looking back to see if there's anybody else that I might have missed. These are all the submissions that I received on time. So you guys get the video feedback. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you're having a great spring break. Talk to you guys soon.